All right, welcome everyone. My name is Jacqueline Sayano. I am the Assistant Director at Inspired Instruction. And this webinar is a guide to the 22-23 New Jersey curriculum requirements. So I definitely encourage you as we go to write down any questions that you may have. There will be a Q&A session towards the end. So let's get started. So our agenda for this webinar is I want to take some time to go over the revisions for the standards, the New Jersey Student Learning Standards. I want to take some time to explain all of the required mandates and inclusions for curriculum, especially the new ones. And then, like I said, we will definitely have some time for Q&A. So please feel free to write down your questions. And then when we get to the Q&A portion, I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. So with that being said, we're going to start off with a little poll. So you should have a Zoom poll coming your way. So the question is, how confident are you that your school or district's curriculum is up to date on all of the 22-23 curriculum requirements? So either you're very confident, like, yes, we're done, we're ready for CUSAC, ready to rock. We still have some work to do. You're not very confident that your curriculum is revised for 2022, 2023, or you're not sure. Okay, so take a couple of seconds. How confident are you that your school or district is up to date for all of the 22-23 curriculum requirements? I still got a couple people coming in, so I'm going to just leave this poll up for another minute or so. So while you guys are answering the poll, the reason I asked this is that, we've been working with schools, all year to make sure people are up to date and ready for, to be CUSAC'd or just ready for September, that everything is up to date. We've been auditing curriculum, we've been revising curriculum, we've been writing curriculum. And I think one of the big themes that I noticed was that there were so many new changes that a lot of people weren't aware of everything, because some of them were not widely broadcasted, which is why today's session is so important, just to kind of go over, all right, what are the expectations for my school and my district? So thank you for everyone who participated in the poll. It looks like the majority of you, 83% of you, say we still have some work to do. And that is totally okay, because you still have time. Everything does not need to be implemented until September. So for those of you still just joining us now, we are just getting started. And if you have questions as I go, please feel free to jot them down. And then when we get to the Q&A session, I am happy to answer any questions you may have. All right, and away we go. All right, so the first thing I want to do is talk about the NJSLS revisions. There were a ton of revisions over the past year, and everything kind of got pushed back because of COVID in terms of when they had to be implemented. But all of these revisions and all these revised NJSLS must be implemented for September. So that means that all of your curricula for these content areas, which is everything except for math and ELA, has revised standards. And these revised standards must be reflected in your curriculum and then hence in your teachers' lesson plans starting in September. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each one just briefly and kind of give you the general big changes. Because again, if you're a curriculum advisor, you're a principal, you're a supervisor, you may not be directly writing the curriculum, your teachers might be doing that, but at the same time, it's good for you to know overall, okay, these are the big changes in each content area. So we're going to start with standard one, which is visual and performing arts. So visual and performing arts, in terms of their major changes, they kind of did a major restructuring of the VPA standards. Their big new inclusion was media arts. Media arts did not exist as a category previously in the 2014 NJSLS. It does exist now. And the other big change was that now there's a more specialized approach to music. So instead of it just being general music, once you get to the middle school level, there's more areas. So there's guitar, there's keyboard, there's, traditional and emerging ensembles. This is really going to affect like your chorus, your band, those kinds of classes. And at the middle school level, the other change is students are required to show proficiency in just one of those subdisciplines, not all of them. So if we're doing general music and then, music technology, they just have to show proficiency in music technology, not also guitar and keyboard and ensemble and comp and theory. They only have to pick one to show proficiency in. So that is helpful. And then the other big restructuring for VPA was they added these artistic processes, which you can see in that chart on my PowerPoint. So basically it breaks it down into different areas. There's 11 anchor standards, regardless of what we're talking about. So whether it is music, whether it is media arts, whether it is dance, everything is divided by these 4 categories, and each one has 11 standards total. So the artistic processes are creating. The second one is a combination of performing, presenting, producing. The third one is responding, and the last one is connecting. So you'll see that whatever the anchor standards happen to be for, again, whether it's media arts or dance or whatever, they all fall under these same categories in every single subdiscipline. So that's the big change, the big changes, I should say, for visual and performing arts. For comprehensive health and phys ed, they actually kind of condensed the standards. So in the original, or the last, I should say, last version, the 2014 version, we had 6 substandards for health and phys ed, and now there's only 3. So you'll see in the chart in 2014, we had wellness, we had drugs and medicine, we had fitness, we had all these very specific subgroups. And now they've taken them and they've integrated all the same standards, but they've just put them into 3 categories. So personal and mental health, physical wellness, and safety. And I think one of the things that's important to note that when you're doing curriculum for health and phys ed, there are performance expectations in personal and mental health that might fit into both health and PE. Same thing for safety. There might be ones that fit in both health and PE. So it's not like before where you knew, okay, integrated skills was only going to go in my PE curriculum. It wasn't going to fit in health. Drugs and medicine was only going to go in my health curriculum. Now that they're kind of broader and there's only 3 of them, it's just important to note that as you're doing health and phys ed curriculum, that in these 3 categories, you might have a performance expectation that goes in health, one that goes in phys ed, and it's not going to necessarily follow as much rhyme or reason as the other ones did. For science, from my conversations with science teachers did not really change as much as some of the other ones did. It does work off of these 3 dimensions where you have your science and engineering practices, which we've always had, but now everything's kind of more integrated. You have your disciplinary core ideas and cross-cutting concepts, and then you have your performance expectations that are kind of come out of these 3 things. So again, the science standards didn't really change too much in terms of wording. It's just how they look when you open the document is going to look a little bit different just in terms of formatting. But the wording itself, unless you aren't familiar with science and engineering practices, they're not going to look too much different than what they looked like before. Social studies had big changes. And I've seen this year, especially when we've been working with social studies teachers to revise and audit their curriculum. If you taught world history in grades K to 5, your curriculum is going to have to be redone because world history no longer has standards in grades K to 5. We do not start world history standards until by the end of grade 8. So that means any world history you were covering in grades K through 5 has to go away because there are no more standards that go with them. So that was the one big change. The other big change is that the NJSLS is now following the National Standards for History model, and they've divided everything into eras, so time periods. So you'll see on my PowerPoint, I put a little example there, like era 1 for by end of grade 5, is 3 Worlds Meet, which is the beginning to 1620. So everything is chronological, which is helpful, I think, from a historical perspective that things are chronological. But it is important to note that when you look at these revised standards, that everything does go by time period. And again, that only starts by end of grade 5. So K to 2, it's kind of like, hey, you know, you're going to do US history, which is 6.1. You're going to do active citizenship, which is 6.3, and there are no eras. Once we start with US history by end of grade 5, then we start with these eras, which basically just says we're covering things in chronological order. And you'll notice the performance expectations now have coding that show you which era we're working with. Okay, so grades 5 through 12 use eras. US history starts grades 3 to 5. Okay, world history starts grades 6 through 8. So again, if you were teaching world history in grades K through 5, you no longer have standards that relate to those. So that might be a big project if that's what you were doing initially. And I have seen it with some districts that we've worked with this year, that we've had to completely revamp what are we doing in grade 5, because it has to be US history or active citizen. So just something to keep in mind. And again, as we're going, if you have questions, please jot them down. I will happily answer questions when we get to the end of the Q&A session. World languages, also a pretty big shift. This is the only content area that benchmarks by proficiency levels instead of grade bands. So our core areas, right? Science, social studies, ELA, math, it's grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. For social studies, you have like by end of grade 2, but they're all grade band. With world languages, it's proficiency level. So now instead of by end of grade 2, it's called novice low. Okay, by end of grade 5 or by end of grade 8, if they start a new language in middle school, is novice mid. So you have these proficiency levels. It's based on the ACTFL. And so your curriculum might no longer be called K to 2 Spanish. It's probably going to be called novice low Spanish, so that you are abiding by the NJSLS language. So that is really important to note as well. And then you have novice high, which is if we start a language in elementary school, that would be by the end of grade 8. Or if you start the new language in high school, that would be by the end of grade 12. And then you have your intermediate low to your distinguished, that would be, you know, by end of grade 12. So that would be where your honors classes come in, your AP classes come in, things like that. So that is a pretty big change, because and it is the only content area that does proficiency levels. And then within each proficiency level, they have the standards are divided by modes of communication. So kind of like how VPA had those 4 categories, the presenting, producing, responding, world languages has how they are communicating: interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational. And again, remember, this is just a quick overview. I did send everybody a handout, and in the handout, there are links to the standards. There are all these things that I'm talking about. And obviously, again, I can answer any questions you want when we get to the Q&A session. Computer science and design thinking. So this is going to replace the technology standards that are in your curriculum. So there are no longer technology standards. There are computer science and design thinking standards. They are pretty specific to computer science. So it's no longer, you're not really going to find in here standards that say, you know, can produce a document on a word processing software. It's not that general anymore. So standard 8.1 is computer science. This used to be computational thinking and programming. So, you know, concept skills related to data and analysis and computing systems. And then 8.2 used to be technology education, and it's now called design thinking. These ones are going to be a little more general. So if you're looking at, you know, cross-curricular standards, probably 8.2 is going to be where you find relevant standard 8 performance expectations that you can fit into ELA or science or social studies, because the ones in there are about like effects of technology on the world or ethics or culture, things like that. So they are a little more general. So if you look at the standards, you're going to read 8.1, and it's like about algorithms and data input. And you might say, okay, these do not apply to any other subject but computer science. Take a look at 8.2. 8.2 does have more concepts that are general and can be used as interdisciplinary standards in your curriculum. Standard 9, career readiness, life literacies, and key skills. So this is replacing your 21st century skills. Okay, so career readiness, life literacies, and key skills. You have 3 areas that you are concerned with. 9.1 is personal financial literacy, and 9.2 is your career awareness, exploration, prep, and training. They're similar to what they were before. They've just kind of been revised based on feedback that the state got from teachers. 9.3 is still your career specific one. So you're probably not going to be too worried about them unless you're doing like an automotive class or cosmetology, something like that. 9.4 is going to be the one that is probably most relevant to the majority of your other content areas. So 9.4 is probably going to be where you pull your interdisciplinary standards for your curriculum. So it focuses on stuff like creativity and innovation, working together, tech literacy, awareness of cultures, digital citizenship. So a lot of those old tech standards, like using a word processing document, creating a presentation with a group, those are no longer found in standard 8. They're now probably going to be found in 9.4, or at least some version of them. So 9.4 is really going to be your go-to for the majority of content areas when you are looking for interdisciplinary standards to put into your curriculum. 9.4 is pretty inclusive of all content areas. All right, before I move any further, does anyone have any specific questions about just the NJSLS revisions? You can absolutely unmute. I know Ms. Sanchez said, what is the recommendation for media arts? Is it a standalone curriculum or standards embedded? So that is a great question. If you do not have a media arts class, okay, because I just worked with a district that it's a small district, we were revising their curriculum, they don't have a media arts class. So what we did was we revised their regular art class to make sure that those media arts standards were included into that curriculum, so that there were media arts activities, instructional strategies, so that those standards could be covered. So if you have a media arts class, great, that's where those standards would go. If you don't, they absolutely can be embedded into a different art related class.
Jacqueline, can that be taught by a media specialist?
Like
there's specific certification that is required to teach the media arts.
I would think it's someone who has an art background, an art certification, not necessarily library arts, if that's what you're referring to. So I think it's someone who has a VPA background.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions on the revised standards so far? And you can unmute or you can put it in chat. Okay, awesome. All right, so let's talk about the required mandates and inclusions. So some of these should look very familiar and some of them are going to be brand new. So for the most part, this has been the case for quite a few years now. In our curriculum, we are required to have integration of interdisciplinary connections in every content area. So if it's an ELA curriculum, we also need to show connections to social studies or visual and performing arts or math or something. We have to have integration of 21st century themes and skills. And like I said, that's now really going to be covered by your 9.4, career readiness, life literacies, and key skills, because those are your 21st century themes. And then integration of social emotional learning. And it's really up to you how you integrate that, but it should be integrated somewhere into the curriculum. So the first mandate I want to talk about is the diversity and inclusion instruction mandate. So what I want you to know is a lot of these mandates, or all of these mandates, are pretty vague in terms of the how. They tell you what and they tell you where, but the how you do it is really up to you. So when we work with schools to audit or revise their curriculum, we pretty much say, okay, what do you do already? How does it relate to these mandates? And then how can we build on it? So for example, for this one, it says, okay, Instruction on diversity inclusion in the appropriate place in the curriculum. So that's very, very vague, but it does say it has to be covered grades K through 12. This does give some ideas. It promotes diversity, tolerance. It covers race and ethnicity, disabilities, religious. So this definitely gives you some background of like, okay, I should be thinking about these things. And because we have a whole bunch of other mandates that fall under this umbrella, it is really easy to implement. So for diversity inclusion, you're basically just making sure that in K through 12, there are topics, instructional materials, something, activities, whatever it happens to be, that fall under these different categories that we include in diversity and inclusion. So for example, Holocaust law would fall under that umbrella. So the Holocaust law for New Jersey says, again, we have to include instruction of the Holocaust and genocides in the appropriate place. So I always tell teachers, you don't want to force it into your curriculum if it doesn't fit, but if you can find a way to make it fit and it's relevant and it's useful, then definitely do it. And this is required for K through 12. And the other thing I want to note about Holocaust law is that you don't just have to teach about the Holocaust, the Ukrainian genocide, anything like that. It's in general, you can talk about things that focus on personal responsibility, why it's important to fight hatred, why it's important to stand up against racism. Okay, that is all covered under Holocaust law. And I put, again, links in that handout I sent you for some helpful resources on where to start with that. We also have Amistad law, which again falls under the diversity and inclusion umbrella. Again, very vague. It says the appropriate place in the curriculum, but definitely K through 12, incorporate information regarding the contributions of African Americans to our country. Again, kind of interpretive. And I always tell teachers when they say, well, I don't know what I'm going to put in here. I say, look for books written by African American authors, pick topics that focus on famous African Americans, historical events, stuff like that. There's always things that can be included. My go-to is always like readworks.com or News ELA, Common Lit. Whenever I'm looking and doing a curriculum and trying to find ways to incorporate these laws and mandates, I just kind of Google search like African American history. And I find things that I can fit in pretty much any content area that are relevant and interesting, okay? LGBTQ plus and disabilities awareness law, again, under that umbrella. For this one, it is for grades 6 through 12 only, and it focuses on political, economic, and social contributions of people with disabilities and the LGBTQ plus population. So appropriate place in the curriculum. I tell teachers the same thing when we're revising curriculum. What are you teaching? Can we find something that is written by a person in one of these two groups, or is the topic of something you're going to read? Historical events, famous scientists, famous mathematicians, there's tons. It's just a matter of finding an appropriate place to fit it in. And again, we don't want to force it, but we want to make sure it is covered so that all of our students feel like they are seen and heard, and that we're also abiding by our New Jersey mandates. All right, new stuff, climate change. So embedded into all of the revised content areas, so everything except for ELA and math, we have climate change standards. So the standards are, again, integrated, they're not separate. So I think I put an example, I did. So for example, for health and phys ed, this is for grade 2. There is a standard already included in the health and phys ed standards, the revised ones, that focuses on climate change. Okay, 2.1.2.CHSS.4. Describe how climate change affects the health of individuals, plants, and animals. Okay, so each content area, every single grade band, okay, except for math and ELA because they have not been revised yet, have climate change standards in them that have to be implemented in the curriculum. Okay, so that means my go-to is, again, if it fits naturally everywhere, great, put it in. If it doesn't fit naturally, pick one unit in grade 4 social studies, and pick a create a PBL, create a reading assignment, a research project, something that ties into your topic, okay? Because you don't want to just stand alone for the sake of doing it, but ties into your topic that covers your standards, okay? And in your handout, there's also a link to this document that has for every single content area and every single grade band, what the specific climate change standards are. All right, other new one. This is brandy new, the AAPI legislation. So in social studies, okay, so only in the social studies curriculum, grades K through 12, again, where it is appropriate, but again, in social studies only. If you want to do it for other content areas, absolutely do it, but it's only required for social studies. Board of Eds have to include instruction on the history and contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Again, those outside websites like ReadWorks, Common Lit, NewsELA, Learning for Justice is a great one too. A lot of them have AAPI sections of relevant resources that your teachers can include into their curriculum. And the other brand new one is civics. So starting this year, if you are a middle school, you have to have a civics course, a standalone civics course that kids have to take somewhere between grades 6 through 8, and it has to be at least 2 marking periods or half a year. So if you don't have a civics course, you will need to be creating one between now and September that middle school students can take. And it kind of gives some guidelines as to, why, or not why, but what should be included. So American system of constitutional democracy, function and limitation of government, citizen roles in democracy. And again, it has to be a minimum of 2 quarters. So if you want to make your first 2 quarters of grade 6 a civics course, that works. You just have to make sure that we are covering civics as its own course of study in the middle school grades. Okay, I just threw a lot of information at you. Oh, Charles is just throwing out resources. Look at this. Thank you so much. Lots of good stuff in there. And again, there's also links in that handout that I gave you. All right, so who has questions on anything I just mentioned in regards to the revised NJSLS or the mandates? What to do, how to do it? You need help? Talk to me.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
Charlie Rowan, from North Plainfield. You mentioned obviously the DEI and the Holocaust, and you mentioned the Holocaust falls under the DEI, and it matches it, or I hate to say this, but checks the box.
Yeah.
I hate using that phrase.
I know.
But it, coming from with CUSAC on the way. So, in your experience across working with New Jersey schools and districts, do you find that in the curriculum, do you have a separate DEI location, or is it just highlighted under the Holocaust? Because the way that I understood it is you need to have the Holocaust, row, the Amistad row, the LGBTQ row, and then now the DEI, because DEI isn't necessarily content, but it could be creating a classroom environment that's welcoming.
Right.
And then, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
And then the AAPI, this comes out recently, and the commission hasn't really officially been formed yet.
Right.
So, and there's Latin, and in terms of the standards weren't updated to show the AAPI. So in terms of the standards, it's very minimal, especially in some of the various grade levels that, like, for example, we don't really talk about a lot of that stuff in the K to 5, K to 8 realm. Right.
So I'll tell you, we've been looking for a lot of paired texts to cover AAPI for grades K through 5. A lot of paired texts, because again, it might not be necessarily a main topic in what you're covering, but it definitely can be a connected topic. But in regards to your other question, when we do curriculum audits and revisions, I have a checklist that we go through, and it doesn't really matter so much where it goes in your curriculum. Like, you want to have a separate box, you want to have whatever you want to have. I've seen some schools have a separate box for each and they check it off. Some schools just have a box that says diversity and inclusion, and then we list the activities and the resources and put in parentheses, like this covers Amistad, or this covers SEL, or this covers AAPI. So it doesn't really matter how you format it. I know in the school, one of the districts I just worked with, they recently got CUSAC'd, and CUSAC did recommend identifying, like in parentheses, for example, what mandate each resource covers.
I think the hardest thing is, I'm in Somerset County. The expectations in Somerset County are different expectations than Morris County,
It's true.
which is different than South, with the southern, southern New Jersey. And so you talk to people, but it really comes down to what your county supervisor states. And like, I actually had a meeting this morning with Susan Bruder, and we had a conversation, and there's a lot of leeway. It's a lot of homegrown and local
Yes.
responsibility.
Yes. Yep. No, it's true. And it is. And again, I think that's really the majority of our work this year has just been helping schools get a handle on all of this. And I just want to pull up, this is a great resource that you shared in the chat. I really appreciate that. I definitely want to take a closer look at that.
This was shared with me this morning in my county group
Perfect.
from people. So it's one of those that, just adding it, wanted to share the information.
No, I love it. Because you know what, you're right. Like, because the AAPI commission hasn't been formed yet, it's not like the Holocaust has they have a website for their commission. Amistad has a website. You can find millions of resources. AAPI, it's required for September, but there isn't a ton of stuff yet. So that is really helpful. Thank you. All right, did I answer all your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Does anybody else have questions about anything I just went over?
Jacqueline, I was under the impression, and I can't find when I was looking to see where I read it, that I read that for civics, the standards themselves had civics performances. So
They do.
that would suffice for civics in the middle school. Is that correct?
Kind of. So yeah, so there are civics standards in social studies. However, like, you might include one civics standard in unit 4 of grade 7. That does not fulfill the civics requirement. So even though there are civics standards that might be integrated here and there, you need to still have at least 2 quarters of a civics course where it's the sole focus is civics in the middle school grades.
And that can't be a semester of social studies and a semester of civics, right? It has to be.
Oh, it can be. No,
Oh, it
that's
can
fine.
be.
Yep, it can be integrated. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'll say in North Plainfield, I have 6th grade is my US course, my American history course. What I'm doing is I'm having my teachers right now do an audit of our current curriculum. We do Revolution to Reconstruction. So they're going through and removing some fluff to make room for the civics to be marking period 2 and marking period 3. What you have to do is you have to show the equivalent of a semester.
Correct.
Whether you have it in 1 grade or 2 grades, you have to show the equivalent, but it cannot just be a one-off lesson here and there.
Right. So I'll tell you what we did for another school was for grades 6, 7, and 8, the first marking period of each of those grades is going to be a civics marking period. So technically it equals 3 quarters. So they're covering it, but they also wanted continuity. So we did the first marking period of each of the 3. So it definitely can be integrated. It doesn't have to be like a civics course, like, so to speak. It can just be a civics semester. That's fine. But it has to be titled civics so that we know it's that you're meeting the civics mandate.
Okay. Thank you. And just one more question for computer science. I know we have the 8.1 and the 8.2, and you did say the 8.2, for the most part, those can be embedded across the different content areas, but the 8.1, it is very specific.
So those are really going to be used for your business classes, for your computer classes, stuff like that. 8.1 might not be your #1 choice for interdisciplinary standards for your other content areas. Like, they might fit sometimes in math, maybe sometimes in science, but for the most part, those will be your standards that you use for your business courses, your computer courses, stuff like that.
So if you do not have computer classes or computer related arts class in the elementary grades, what is the recommendation from the state?
I do not know the answer to that. I would think they would have to be embedded somewhere else so that all students are getting those standards somewhere in K through 5.
Okay.
That would be my assumption.
All right, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I did just put a link in the chat. I'm still answering questions, but if you are, ready, I know you guys are busy. So as long as you fill out that form, I appreciate you guys being here. Does anybody else have any other questions? I'm happy to stay on and answer questions. All right, and the recording of this will be available on our website probably by tomorrow. My email address, everybody has, because I sent out the invites and I sent out the handout. So if you have any questions or you need any support, you need to pick my brain, please feel free to reach out. And again, I really do appreciate everybody taking the time. I know it's been a busy, busy year. And this is something else we have to make sure that we're, keeping in mind as we move forward to September. All right, so please fill out the link in the chat, and then thank you guys so much for coming and have a wonderful day.